Hi, everyone. I'm super excited to talk about a crucial topic today, building safer AI systems. The focus today is really going to be on the practical side of this, so how engineers and adjacent teams can integrate responsible practices into their work every day. We're going to explore how technical decisions impact AI safety throughout the entire dev lifecycle. A little bit about me. My name is Allegra. I'm the co-founder and CTO at Lumiera. We are a boutique advisory firm that helps leaders navigate AI responsibly, and a big part of that is enabling the technical teams to build it responsibly. I'm based in Lisbon, and I come from a background in tech in both the US and EU. I've managed engineering portfolios with a focus on data programs, working super closely with data engineering, machine learning, data science, and all of the other great teams adjacent to engineering. So here's what we're going to cover today. I'm going to start with a really quick look at what responsible AI is, briefly touch on why it's so important with some real-world examples. Then I'll spend the bulk of my time integrating responsible practices into the AI lifecycle. So what it actually means to be practical in this space. And then we'll look at some available tools out there and some strategies. And finally, the next steps you can take to get started. And my goal is for you to leave with three things today. First, a clearer understanding of what responsible AI principles are, identifying the key areas within the AI lifecycle where you can operationalize responsibility. And then third, some practical strategies and tools you can start using to build safer AI systems. Okay, let's start with a really brief definition of responsible AI. So at its core, responsible AI is an approach to the design, development, deployment, and use of AI systems guided by a set of key principles. That includes things like fairness, accountability, transparency, all the things you see on this list here. You might be asking, what about ethics? I don't see it there. Or what about sustainability? What about inclusivity? Those are also responsible AI principles that you can hear often. The thing is, there is no industry-aligned single definition of responsible AI. But instead of getting stuck on definitions today, I really want to focus on what it means in practice for us as technical practitioners. So why does operationalizing responsible AI matter? Why does responsibility even matter? There are ethical imperatives here, but there are real world consequences when we don't build AI systems responsibly. And we actually like to say that everything that's not responsible AI is irresponsible AI, or just if you're not building responsibly, you're doing the opposite. So it's something that we care a lot about and something that's super important. And these aren't just theoretical problems, right? There are incidents happening every single day when people are not building responsibly. I've pulled just a few from the news recently, and AI incidents can have a significant social, economic, and even physical impact. Maybe you're familiar with some of these news stories. They are quite serious. Gender and racial biases in healthcare, mental health, and the impact on individuals when they are trying to find companionship with AI, data leaks, a ton of different things, law case studies. The breadth of incidents is sort of endless, and this showcases the importance of why we have to think responsibly as we're building. And the data really confirms this trend. AI incidents are on the rise. There is a resource called the AI Incident Database that's fantastic for tracking these sorts of things. And we've seen a 61% increase in AI incidents between 2023 and 2024. And if we don't build in the way that I'm talking about today, we're going to probably see this continue to rise. So research is revealing a significant and continued lack of standardization in responsible AI reporting. This is something that was called out in the Stanford HAI Index last year when they first found this lack of standardization. And then in the most recent report, which came out not too long ago, this has continued. So it's still a problem. And while major model developers consistently test their flagship models on the same general capabilities benchmarks, covering things like math, coding, language skills, there is no standard like that for safety and responsible AI assessments. And that kind of standardization and those evals are really important for enabling a direct comparison between models. And there's this clear consensus among developers on which general capabilities benchmarks to use, but we don't have that same structure for responsibility and responsible AI benchmarks. So how do we actually do this? How do we move from the principles that I mentioned earlier and the problems that I just called out to practical solutions? And the answer is really integrating responsibility into the entire development lifecycle. So we'll walk through some of those key stages. I have some here. We have design, development, deployment, and usage. And this really isn't a checkbox at the end. This is not just about compliance or one team handling this. It needs to be considered at every single step. So let's start at the very beginning, design. This is where we lay the foundation for responsible AI. So understanding impact and identifying risks, you can proactively assess potential harms rather than just building something without thinking ahead or what the impact will be. You can just take a minute and work through what is the possible outcome of this and think beyond just the intended use case. What else could happen here if this isn't used in the right way? Is there something we didn't consider? What are all of those different risks that could occur so you can then find ways to mitigate them? And then setting responsible goals. So measurable technical requirements around things like fairness and privacy are super important here. So that means translating these abstract principles into concrete and measurable requirements. And then who are you working with to collaborate on what these things mean? How are you identifying what fairness is? Usually an engineer is the one coming up with these things. And that shouldn't be on their shoulders. There shouldn't just be one person who's building super quickly, probably, to decide what fairness means for an entire organization. And so that's why collaboration with domain experts is super critical at this stage. And then data strategy. We all know that data is really the bedrock of AI, and it's also the source of its problems. So critically evaluating data for bias and completeness is really important. And to have a plan in place for bias mitigation and detection and how you're going to document data provenance. So really just document everything at this stage and take a minute to think. That's my one takeaway here. But I do want to identify and understand that there are key challenges in this phase. So we have defining contextual fairness, what I mentioned earlier. That's a very abstract term, and it can change depending on what the context is. Anticipating all your harms up front, also something that's very challenging. It's impossible to know everything that could potentially happen, but you can do the work to try. And then working with bias data, there are a ton of different data sets out there, really thinking through which ones you want to use and understanding what they contain and where they came from is really important to handling this in the best way possible. Moving on to development, now we're building the model, we're building the system. This is where the technical choices are directly impacting safety. And so I really want to call out building with accountability and building responsibly. So accountability was one of those principles that I mentioned. And that means things like I previously called out, bias detection and mitigation. You can start to integrate explainability, also deciding what kind of models you want to use and what kind of models you want to build. Maybe going with something more simple if it makes sense for a use case, if it's more explainable, or if you're working in a super high risk space where you need that transparency and explainability, deciding a model that makes sense for your use case, not just the biggest one or the newest one on the market. And there are also libraries out there like Lime and SHAP that you can use for explainability as well. And robustness security testing, finding those adversarial examples to make sure that you are building a system that will last when up against circumstances that you were not expecting. And then this responsible model selection, again, it's hard because we don't have those standards of responsibility, like I mentioned before. It's one of those key challenges that I'm calling out here, the lack of standard benchmarks. But you can evaluate against some relevant industry standards out there right now for responsibility. And you can come up with your own, defining what fairness means for your organization, defining what your thresholds are for bias, for example, and coming up with what that looks like as a sort of framework, and then testing models against that before you decide to move forward with one. And then considering your complexity explainability trade-offs is also super important at this stage. Back to documentation, tracking different configurations, having version control, your data preparation, and making sure that you're recording all of your eval results. I think tracking everything and documentation is something we're all familiar with. Maybe it's not everybody's favorite thing, but it goes throughout every single stage of this life cycle. So I'll probably bring it up again. But it's one of those things that makes a really big difference in terms of transparency and accountability. And some of those key challenges I mentioned before, persistence of bias, even when you did that original detection, the explainability versus performance challenge that we sometimes run into. And then again, how do you test against standard benchmarks if we don't have any? And I think we can all decide now together to take steps to come up with what those are. You know, the features in our hands, we can decide what those benchmarks look like and make them more popular. All right, into deployment. So our system is going into production. This is where it's interacting with the real world and new challenges are coming up. So monitoring is really important here, continuous monitoring. It's not just let it go out in the wild and then forget about it or don't do anything to keep it running safely. So you want to start tracking things, not just performance, but again, bias, drift. There are a lot of different things that you need to consider once something is in production. Having things like anomaly detection set up and alerts. I mentioned thresholds before. If you start to hit some of those, how are you pivoting? How are you going to react to that? Utilizing monitoring tools. There are some great platforms out there. Huge shout out to Comet as well. There's so much to be done there in terms of tracking how your models and systems are performing so that you can take the necessary actions to make sure that they're running safely. Preparing for the unexpected as well. So having rollback procedures, having an incident response plan. Maybe some of these things sound basic. Maybe you're already doing them in your non-AI work. But I want to call it out here again. I think one of the things that I'm seeing quite often is that AI is sort of being treated differently when it comes to development and putting things into production. And just like everything else, it should have a plan for those unexpected cases or when things are going wrong. And secure deployment practices, so preventing unauthorized access, ensuring data privacy in production. Again, probably things you're very familiar with in other work or maybe in your regular machine learning operations, but it is something that I'm seeing sort of drift from standards at the moment because we're moving so quickly. So I want to call it out here as an important element to support that safety and accountability principles I mentioned before. And again, I know there are challenges here, defining clear thresholds, what effective monitoring looks like, detecting super subtle drift. So it's not easy, but it is important. And then finally, usage. This is a vital stage for learning and improvement. So you want to learn from real world use, not just what happened in your controlled environment. Having user feedback mechanisms is something that really supports responsible AI. Back to that transparency principle, back to the accountability. If you are going to take responsibility for what you've built, then you should take responsibility for how to improve it and change it based on the feedback that you receive. And also analyzing operational data to make sure you get that full picture and iterating responsibly. So you should use this feedback to improve the system and having a feedback loop for retraining models, ensuring updates are secure and not introducing new problems. Back to that thing of you can't just put it out there and forget about it. There has to be some accountability and ownership for the systems that we're building. And human oversight. Maybe sometimes people forget about this one. I know we're trying to use AI for everything now, but humans still serve a purpose. So for critical applications, human oversight might be necessary, probably is a good idea. So designing workflows that allow for human intervention and providing the context that the humans need to make informed decisions. And this can be challenging, gathering useful feedback and defining what it looks like to make those changes and when to prioritize updates. Something that is quite lacking right now are feedback mechanisms that provide you with the data, both qualitative and quantitative, that you need to make very informed and informed improvements, essentially. So maybe a thumbs up, thumbs down works for some things, but it doesn't work for everything. And it might not provide all of the context you need. So really thinking about how you're designing that experience for usage once something is in production. Okay, so some tools and strategies. You really don't have to operationalize responsible AI from scratch. There are a ton of things out there. already existing that you can use. One that I will call out before I even get into this is your brain. It's free for you to use, already at your disposal. So just thinking a little bit before we start building and making sure to continue to think about that ownership and accountability and safety throughout the entire life cycle. We don't need to just rely on technology and these toolkits, although they're extremely helpful throughout this entire process, right? We all can participate in what safer AI systems look like just by taking more time to think through why we're building what we're building and thinking through the impact it will have before we go into that process. But luckily, we do have things to support us. So for evaluation and debugging, there are fairness toolkits out there, explainability libraries that I talked about before. There are tools for testing robustness. For documentation and transparency, there are things like model and system cards. This is a concept that I'm not seeing used too frequently right now. A lot of the bigger developers are using them, but it's something that I would love to see start becoming more popular. So creating explanations and understandable explanations for non-technical teams as well on how models can be used, what they should be used for, how they were built. Same thing for systems. And then lineage tracking as well. Again, documentation, important at every stage, will never do you wrong. It really helps with that transparency and the trust that you'll need from your end users. And then on the monitoring and governance side, I called out Comet before, I'll call it out again, but there are other great platforms out there for ML ops, for observability. There are also really good platforms now arising for compliance and governance. So that's not something I talked about a ton today, but it is important and it is a huge part of responsible AI, the regulatory aspect of this. So we have laws like the EU AI Act, for example, and other regulation coming up across the entire world. And we need to remain compliant. And you need to be able to track what you're building in order to ensure that compliance. So there are platforms out there, and I would really recommend to start that earlier on and understanding how to track what you're building now so that you can become compliant and remain compliant. And then some key considerations here. So tool integration, understanding what makes sense for you in your systems, deciding if you want to go open source versus commercial. There are so many fantastic open source libraries out there for access. I haven't called out Hugging Face yet, but I'm sure all of you appreciate it just as much as I do. There are some amazing data sets out there as well that really showcase underrepresented data sets as well. And it has model cards and system cards set out there for you to evaluate. We have a leaderboard to understand where models fall. So there are fantastic resources out there that we should all be using. And then evolving landscape, definitely a key consideration. Things are changing so fast. I mentioned compliance. It's hard to have regulation that keeps up with as fast as we're moving on the technical side. And that just needs to be considered with how we're moving. So again, thinking through why we're building what we're building, if it's going to have a positive impact, what the potential risks are, knowing that we are going to continue to evolve at such a rapid pace. So building safer AI is not just an engineering task, it's really a collaboration across the entire organization. And I'm going to call out some organizational strategies that we can all use. So starting with inventory, this seems quite basic, but it can really go a long way. So having a project mapping. At the moment, do you know which projects are leveraging AI within your organization? Do you have a ton of machine learning models being tracked in a spreadsheet? Do you have Gen AI systems starting to be built by various teams, but you're not really sure who owns them? All of this is quite simple, but again, it's really foundational and important. So starting with this step of building out a centralized project mapping and inventory of all of the different AI systems that are being built and managed within your organization is a really great first step. And then literacy. AI literacy is really at the core of what we do at Lumira. It's very important. You can't make strategic decisions without having a basic understanding of how AI works, what the capabilities and limitations are, and the larger impact of AI systems. So training programs are a really great way to get everybody in your organization speaking the same language about AI and understanding, again, what the positives are, the negatives are, what the risks are, and how we can start to build more effectively together. And AI literacy is actually now required by regulation. So in the EU, as part of the EU AI Act, starting in February 2025, if you are a model developer or deployer, your staff needs to be properly trained on your systems. So just calling that out as something that's super critical and I think will continue to be in demand as AI becomes more central in everything that we're doing. And as part of literacy as well, you can have community engagement. So peer-to-peer learning, sharing which projects you're working on, what's getting you excited. That's another great way to build adoption. So if you're trying to drive AI across your entire organization, as a leader or as an individual contributor that's trying to push something that you've built, getting people bought into the idea and so they trust what you're building as well is a great way to drive things forward. Data governance, I talked about it before. It will always be important. As somebody who has worked on data teams for a long time, this will remain near and dear to my heart. So having really good data quality standards and access control, having good data hygiene, data classification, all of those things that have been understood and important for a long time will continue to be important. And it really provides engineers with better quality and more responsibly managed data. So if you're trying to build effective AI systems, you need effective data. And so this isn't just a responsibility aspect, it's really about performance as well. You need good data to have good systems. Evaluation metrics, I talked about at the beginning, collaborating with domain experts to define what your metrics are for your given models or systems. So for example, what fairness means for you, what success even looks like. In the AI space right now, productivity is really called out as the main metric that people are going after. But what does that mean for you? Do you understand what your baseline is at the moment? Do you know what it looks like actually to be more productive? We're seeing a lot of organizations not get the return on their investment that they were expecting. And a lot of it is because they didn't ever define success. So having metrics that make sense for your system, for your organization is a really good starting point. And then policy and regulation. So I talked about regulation in terms of, regulation that's happening at the global level, but having regulation and policies within your organization is also something that you should be working on. So how do you want people within your team to be using AI or building AI? These are things that could relate to your values as an org, as what your KPIs or main goals are, but people want that safety and understanding of what they're supposed to be doing. There maybe is this thought that if you have regulation or policy that you're slowing people down, but they can really thrive in an environment where they know what their boundaries are and what they should and shouldn't be going after. And having that stakeholder engagement in the development will make it seem so that you're not impacting innovation or development. If you involve people and really make it a community practice and socialize it, rather than coming up with this in a silo and then forcing it upon everybody, you're going to have a lot better chance of active engagement. And then human oversight mechanisms. I talked about having human in the loop, designing really good feedback mechanisms, having good decision-making frameworks and escalation protocols. So like when things go wrong, when we talked about incidents before, what do you do then? Who do you reach out to? There are so many different aspects of organizational strategies that don't require a huge change from how we're already working and can be started immediately. So you don't need to redevelop everything. You don't need to start from scratch. You can really take these small steps in existing frameworks to make a huge difference. And I do want to say that the most important step is the first step. I know that implementing comprehensive responsible AI can feel daunting. It can also feel unrelated to you. I think a lot of people feel that responsibility and ethics and compliance, all of this is sort of a legal or privacy team issue, or it's something that should be coming from governments, but it's up to all of us. We're all shaping the future of technology. We all care about things like performance and robustness and resilience. These are things that are quite familiar to us as technical practitioners, and that doesn't change. We're just talking about how to use those familiar frameworks to build safer systems overall and to have a much more positive impact at scale. So a quick recap, what have we covered today? We have discussed what responsible AI is. Hopefully you've walked away with a more clear understanding and definition. We've talked through the risks and considerations when you are ignoring those responsible practices and the real world implications of that. We talked through some of the available tooling that's out there and the strategies to operationalize responsible AI, and then how to take action, take that first step, choose a framework, choose a principle, and start going after it. And I hope you walked away with these three things we talked about at the beginning: understanding how to integrate responsible AI principles into your technical workflows, identifying key areas in the lifecycle where responsibility can be operationalized, and then practical strategies and tools for building safer systems. Thank you so much. I want to shout out my co-founder, Emma, who is also the CEO of Lumiera. We are a small and powerful team. We are running an executive education program where we really give leaders the tools and knowledge they need to navigate AI responsibly. Again, that core of AI literacy is something that we will continue to push forward. I was really excited to take part of this conference today. I really support Comet, their entire team, and all of you for coming and joining this as well. We do have a newsletter that we write every single Thursday. It's been running for over a year. We put a lot of time and research into this, and it really helps build AI literacy. We try to keep it under 7 minutes, so you become more AI literate in just 7 minutes every single week. So I hope you take a chance to subscribe. And then feel free to reach out to us at any time through LinkedIn, our website, reaching out through our newsletter as well, responding there. Happy to get in touch with you. And thank you so much for your time today.